So off the back of astrology, I went into studying things like science and metaphysics and kinesiology and biology and biochemistry and everything, and I could find astrology in all of it. The Bible is basically astrology. That's what it is, and I think people see the Bible as a religious book. The Bible isn't a religious book, it's a scientific book. In my opinion, you know, some people might disagree, each religion represents a different part of the whole thing. You know, I feel like Christianity really talks about the awakened man, you know, the Messiah. And then you have things like Buddhism, which really talks about the physical being, the physical body. You know, obviously there's lots of other religions that you can go into, but ultimately it is just a different aspect of the one thing.
On another episode of Disciples of Truth, today we have Hayley of HR Astrology. We're going to get into how you got into astrology.
Yeah.
So where did your journey with astrology begin?
Oh, many moons ago, to be honest.
Great topic.
Yeah, many moons ago. I got into astrology probably about over a decade ago now. It started off with tarot, to be quite honest with you. Started messing around with tarot. It's always been a part of my life. I've always been interested in it, and I used to go get readings quite a lot, and I just thought to myself one day, there's got to be more to this. Like, how do you know? How do you know all this stuff? So I spent a good 2 years just really kind of studying tarot, tapping into its secrets and that kind of thing. And when I realised that there was a lot of astrological connections to tarot, that's really when my pursuit with astrology began. And to be quite honest with you, it's never stopped. It's amazing. It's almost like a lotus flower, and it just keeps opening up and just revealing all this stuff. So I studied astrology for a while. I went quite deep into it, to be quite honest with you, and then decided to take myself to astrology school. So I did that, and then I gained my certificate in that. And that was really interesting, meeting people with like minds and that kind of stuff. And it just really opened up my worldview, opened up my perspective, and allowed me to understand myself on a much deeper level. So off the back of astrology, I went into studying things like science and metaphysics and kinesiology and biology and biochemistry and everything. And I could find astrology in all of it. So it is like an overruling subject. It's kind of the thing to study, really. And that's how I got into it, and it's just been evolving ever since, really. Meeting clients and reading for them, and you know, just discovering how diverse the universe really is.
Where did you study then?
So I studied at Mayo School of Astrology. It's based in London, and they do online courses and offline courses, summer courses and that kind of thing. Distance learning courses, and I did an online course, so I attended classes weekly. And then you've got to do projects and things like that, so they can assess you and make sure you're understanding the terminology. I think it's one of the longest running schools. I think it's about 50 years ago. And it was one of the first schools that offered online study as well. So I've been quite lucky to study with some of the most well-known astrologers today.
The greats.
Yeah, Wendy Stacey, she's quite a well-known astrologer. Sue Tompkins. I even attended a university in Wales, I forget what it's called, and had a brief stint with Nicholas Campton as well. And he's again, he delivers a master's degree, and it's the only master's degree to be recognised, you know, with astrology, because you can't actually get a degree in astrology. It's funnily enough, university came from astrology, and because astrology is a study of the universe, you can't actually get a degree because it's 360.
Wow.
So I found that quite interesting, So I've got 360 degrees actually, Craig. So that were interesting as well, and there were a load of people on there that had studied other topics such as ecology and that kind of thing that were bringing it to astrology. So it's much bigger than I think a lot of people realise. Because I think what a lot of people see is the airy-fairy. You know, it's kind of like the pop culture, the absolute mystic Meg and all of that stuff, which is great, don't get me wrong, it's a good form of entertainment and you can have a lot of fun with it, but it's a lot more serious than that. It's deep, you know. Things like law came from astrology, medicine came from astrology, and you know, one of the founders of medicine, I've forgotten his name now. Oh gosh, I'm showing my knowledge now out.
Put on the spot.
Absolutely. But actually said that if you don't have knowledge of astrology, can you even call yourself a practitioner?
Yeah.
And so I found that really interesting, and having a lot of my own health conditions and things that, you know, I'm trying to navigate and overcome and that kind of thing. Astrology answered a lot of questions for me, and it was questions that doctors couldn't. And that's really when my eyes just went, wow, this is amazing. This can be used for big things. So I tend to steer towards medical astrology and using it for healing, but on a practical level, also on a mental level, but on a spiritual level. Like, it can be used for so many things. I think in a nutshell, it could be described as a tool of for diagnostics of many things, basically.
Yeah, well, a lot of Bible, that's also, they are pointing to...
The Bible is basically astrology. That's what it is. And I think people see the Bible as a religious book. The Bible isn't a religious book, it's a scientific book that has been contorted to fit religion.
And it's been taken as literal.
It's been taken as literal, and it's not. It's an encoded scripture. In actual fact, it's I believe it's 66 books in the Bible. So it's not actually just one book. I think there's 66 books, and if you actually do the numerology and everything behind it, it's quite interesting what you find based on the numbers in the Bible and that kind of thing. So obviously it's a very deep book. You need to have a good knowledge of astrology and things like that, and how the universe works, to understand it at the depth, because these people that wrote these scriptures, they were like next level.
I see that with the King James Bible, and they're throwing it out there. Oh yeah, this is the Holy Grail and stuff, and they don't realise that King James were a Freemason, and also King James did a book on demonology as well.
Absolutely.
So it's like, so if the same people are doing that, it's a script as well.
Absolutely.
And they're playing by the script.
Yeah, because, you know, demonology is really, when we say that someone has demons, it's not a grizzly that runs around your house, like hides under your bed. Like, a demon is something that haunts the soul. You know, the body is the temple, and the people have ghosts and they have demons and they reside within. So the book on demonology very much refers to, again, it's probably written a little bit differently, but the book on demonology will refer to the types of hardships that people endure, you know, the things like addictions and habits and behaviours and compulsions. They're all demons, you know, that people need to rid. They need to clean the temple, so to speak. But what's interesting about the King James version, I've got, I think it's one of the original versions. I think it's 1913.
I won't hold you to that.
I think I'm rubbish with numbers, you know, really. I'm remembering dates and stuff, which is really bad to say I'm an astrologer, but I do have it all written down. But there's a book in there that was actually removed from the Bible called the Apocrypha.
All right.
So that's quite interesting. There was lots of scriptures that were removed from the Bible, and as it's been edited and things like that over time. So the more ancient scripture that you read, the more accurate a picture you can get, which is why a lot of the astrology books that I read tend to be old books. You know, the good books that have something to bring to the table too, because it's new perspectives. But the ancient scriptures,
down stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of written in a way that the modern person would understand. You know, all the old books and scriptures are quite difficult to read because of how they used to speak back then. But if you can wrap your head around that, get used to the language, then there's treasures in there that you just don't pull from modern books anymore.
I think we spoke about this off air, is like when we're starting to open our mind up to that perception, we start to read it differently anyway, because our mind's open to them possibilities, really. So you'll start to decode it and look at it in a different way than the literal way. And I think that's kind of what's happening now, isn't it?
Yeah. I think people, it's again age of Aquarius, everyone's waking up, and you know, that's a whole other subject really, but that's basically what's happening, and people are looking into things a lot differently, and the questioning things, and the questioning authority, and the saying, well, that doesn't make sense, and well, if it doesn't make sense, it's probably because it's nonsense, basically. You know, so people are asking questions and they're deep diving, and they're trying to find their own answers, and really that's the movement. You know, with Pisces, it was a lot of suppression. There was a lot of the age of Pisces was very much about religion and suppression and, you know, sacrifices and things like that, whereas we're moving into a a much lighter.
Yeah, a bit more feminine energy as well.
Yeah. Well, it would be. I think, to be quite honest, I think it's masculine. Aquarius is a masculine sign. Yeah, it's a masculine sign, but it's because it's masculine and it's yang energy. It's more projective. So we go into astrology a bit here, but Capricorn's ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and if you think of the planet Saturn, Capricorn is the dark side of Saturn as it rotates on its axis, and Aquarius is the light side. So it's almost like we're giving light to the hardships in life, which is why we're getting a lot more healers stepping forward now and saying, traditional medicine doesn't work, and the things that you're giving us are actually killing us, and that kind of stuff. And people are reverting back to old methods, which really talks about Capricorn. So what we're doing is we're taking the knowledge of Capricorn, which is the established tradition, but we're actually using it in new, innovative ways, which is what Aquarius is, and saying, look, for example, sea moss, it's a natural substance, but it's really beneficial. Things like tissue salts and all of that, it's all organic. And we're using it in new ways. Well, we think it's new ways. Yeah. It's not.
We're just going back to basics.
Back to basics, basically.
We overcomplicate it. I said this other day, we tend to, as human species, we just tend to overcomplicate things that are very simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because it's being spoon-fed to us. They've told us that, calcium is good for you and this, that and the other. In actual fact, calcium's quite bad for you. You get different types of calcium, of course, but, they'll tell us all these things, and in actual fact, the opposite's true. So it's like, where are you getting your knowledge from? Or why are you preaching this knowledge? And it's because the people that are preaching it, that's what they've been taught. So it's just like a repetitive cycle,
Because we've taught, I know a lot of people, like, when we've said with children and stuff about sugar being bad and like, too much salt on tea is bad, I'm like, no, it's not. It's the opposite way around. Like, salt's good for you. Salt should, I think even the Bible says it should be on every meal. Yeah. Whereas sugar is... That's the one to watch out for.
Absolutely. I mean, salt is bad for you if it's table salt, because it's sodium, and basically everything that's good in it has been taken out, and that's what's left over, and that's what most people will use. You go to a cafe and you use salt, you're using table salt. Sea salt has got all the minerals in it that it needs, so it's like it's like a whole salt, if you want to think of it that way. And we need salts in the body, but there's different salts. Yeah. So the salt that we're given is actually the excrement of everything that we need.
Yeah, it's been over-refined.
Yeah, basically that's what it is, and everything's been extracted from it and used in other things, and then we've just been given the remnants and said, right, put that on your dinner. And when you consider that most people put salt on everything they eat, that's how you can understand that salt's destructive, because there's nothing in it to compensate for what it's doing. So in effect, again, it acts like an acid.
Again, overcomplicate the natural basis of something.
Basically, yeah. They're just stripping all the goodness out of everything, really.
So, what I'd like to ask as well is how the moon and how its association with different star signs. Yeah. How does that work?
So the moon is today's subject. Yeah. So really, the moon rules the sign of Cancer. So we'll kind of delve into astrology a little bit now. And I think it's apparent because there's a full moon coming up this month. The month of March, and it's also a lunar eclipse, and that's happening on the 14th, I believe. Yeah. So the moon is associated with the sign of Cancer, and just in that you'll be able to understand why the moon represents healing. Cancer is the crab, and Cancer represents the home, and it represents protection and comforts, and the things that we need in our lives to give us that sense of comfort and that kind of thing, which is our health, really. So it's associated with things like motherhood, fertility, children, again, protection, the home. It talks about privacy, and the things that we do away from the prying eyes of others. So it also represents things that happen beneath the surface of the skin as well. So the moon completes a cycle every 28 and a half days, and throughout that process the moon waxes and wanes, and then we'll have things like a new moon, when the sun and the moon are together, conjoined in the sky. That's called a conjunction. You were actually born on a new moon. And then when it's opposite the sun, that's called a full moon. and I was born on a full moon. And I think it's common knowledge to most people now that when we have a full moon, that's when hospitals seem to go crazy. They go wild. They have lots of people coming in, accidents and emergencies and things like that. And it's a time of lunacy as well.
Yeah, lunatics.
So that's why I was born on a full moon. So yeah, people tend to get a bit crazy around the full moon, and especially if they're into spirituality, you will hear people often, you'll see videos online of it's a full moon, and everyone starts panicking, and then they start, trying to organise themselves, and it causes a sense of chaos, basically, to be honest.
Because they also, a lot of people, I don't know if they were aware, it controls, because it's we're mainly made up of water. They said that it's when, and a lot of people tie parasites to demons, and they say it starts to conjure up then, and that in that cycle of the full moon, that's when they're at the highest peak, when that then controls the emotions.
Yeah.
Sending people to act the way that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So as above, so below, and you've got to understand that you have a whole universe inside you. Now, I've used this example with somebody else before. Imagine the moon at its brightest and fullest, shining on the ocean. You're going to see everything beneath that surface, whether good or bad. So it does kick up a lot of emotions for people. It kicks up a lot of triggers and that kind of stuff, because we start to see beneath the surface of things. Funnily enough, that you're talking about parasites, the full moon in Virgo rules the digestive system, and people tend to get a lot of parasites within the digestive system and that kind of stuff. So it's shining a light on those things. Virgo, again, is the sign of the spring clean. So people will be detoxing right now. Obviously, it's March, people tend to start cleaning up for summer, getting ready for summer, that kind of thing. But yeah, it really kind of shines a light on the things that we're putting into our body that shouldn't be there, the things that we need to rid ourselves of. And again, that doesn't just mean substances, that means things that have been residing there for a while that we probably have just been ignoring. So it's very relevant to healing. The moon is all about healing, it's all about comfort. And later, as we discuss the sacred secretion, you'll understand why the moon is often symbolised as a crescent shape as well. Because there's significance in everything. So when people do follow the patterns of the moon and things, because they're attempting to heal through moon rituals, even the shape of the moon is symbolic of what it represents. You can't even ignore that. So it's really, really interesting. So I think the moon is often overlooked because it's one of the quickest cycles. So it's something that's done consistently.
It's very visual.
It's very, very visual. And it's difficult to do because, again, it also talks about the subconscious. The sun represents our conscious, active mind. The moon represents our subconscious, passive mind. So a lot of the time when these cycles are happening, we're very passive of them, and we're not realising that the moon, Mother Moon, is doing her job to heal us on a consistent basis. But because we're ignorant of that, we're not actually helping the process. We're working against it. Which is why you can develop things like demons, if you want to call it that, because we're being very absent-minded of the fact that these cycles are continuous, and it's a process. It's not just, I'll light a candle and I'll say a prayer under the moon and all my problems will go away. That's not how it works. It's about embodiment, you know. And I feel like embalmment is a good word as well to kind of describe the moon. It's a process of embalmment. So if you think back to ancient Egypt and how they used to lay their loved ones to rest, because the moon represents sleep and rest, there was a whole process of embalmment that they would do, and it would be ritualistic and it would take a while to lay them to rest. And they would again pick specific times to do that, so that they would honour their loved ones and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of mythology around the moon. There's a lot of symbology around it. There's a lot of names, Diana, Isis.
She's just destructive, isn't she?
Yeah. Well, again, I feel like this is a good time to point out as well, because we was talking about the Bible. In my opinion, some people might disagree, each religion represents a different part of the whole thing. You know, I feel like Christianity really talks about the awakened man, you know, the Messiah. And then you have things like Buddhism, which really talks about the physical being, the physical body. You know, obviously there's lots of other religions that you can go into, but ultimately it is just a different aspect of the one thing. It's almost like picking up a crystal and looking at the crystal, and the crystal is that same crystal, but every time you turn that crystal, there is a new perspective, but it's still the same crystal. So even though the moon's known by many different names, it's different phases or different aspects of the moon and the energy that it can bring to you.
Yeah, quite interesting because there's different moons, and I only found out last year. I think the last one of last month was storm moon, and just as that were going on, we were having lots of storms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not by accident or by chance, is it?
No. Well, if you think about every planet, the moon, the sun, they're luminaries, they're not planets, but in astrology we just refer to them as planets. They all give off an atmosphere, you know, and we know that because the sun makes it hot, you know, and when the moon comes out, temperature drops. And again, which is why the moon is a symbol of sickness, really. It's a symbol of healing, but it's also a symbol of sickness. And at night time, when children mostly, but adults as well, when they lay their head down to rest, that's when they tend to feel more sick, and they'll cough through the night, and they'll burn up, and they'll get fevers. And it's because the moon is present. It's the moon's presence, and what it does is it draws out those impurities, like we were saying, and it has a pull on the tides of the ocean. We all know that, you know, I believe it's been scientifically proven, don't quote me on that, but because we do have a majority of water in our body, that's why, basically, because the moon is trying to heal us and it's drawing it out of our systems. All planets have an atmosphere, and again, I won't get into too much astrology, but it's the atmosphere which really determines the habitat of the person, if that makes sense.
Oh, just curious to know as well, if you think it might, you were saying every 28 days, moon, new moon, should say, a full moon. And in a year, our old calendars were 13 months because it would have followed the moon. Do you think we may be going back to that?
I don't think we've ever moved away from it,
no.
to be honest.
No, I mean, just like for a common person, for it to go back to 28 days and actually go and follow that.
I think like everybody should follow a lunar calendar. I believe Islam, I think theirs is a lunar calendar.
Right, yeah.
And it, like you said, it's 13 months rather than 12.
Yeah.
The Julian calendar, I think that's the one that we live by, isn't it? The Julian calendar, I believe. It doesn't account for that 13th month, so we have things like leap years, and it's all distorted. And again, that also ties into the age of Aquarius and the precession of the equinoxes, because everything's shifting, and it's shifting us. So when we feel a little bit disoriented and a bit out of sorts, that's because that's exactly what's happening. You know, you're following a calendar that doesn't even make sense.
By design.
It's by design. It's a man-made calendar, and it's a calendar that has been tampered with over many years. Whereas the cycles of the sun and the moon are pretty accurate. They are accurate. You know, you can follow them over years and years and years, which is what astrologers do, and the precision is just bang on. One of the interesting things that I come to learn about the precession of the equinoxes, again, which means that we've moved into this age of Aquarius, is I noticed a long time ago, before I started doing astrology, that the weather was changing. And it was just like a subconscious thing that I just realised that winter was becoming January and February. And I thought to myself, is it because they keep putting the clocks backwards and forwards? Is it because there's like a minute out here or a minute out there and all of a sudden it's shifted? And with the precession, because of the the shift of the Earth on its axes, it has an effect on the seasons, basically. So where it used to snow on Christmas Day back in the day in yesteryear, and you'd have snow over Christmas, snow is coming a lot later. It's coming in January, February. So the seasons are actually shifting.
February definitely feels in your bones.
Absolutely, that's it. And then so it takes 26,000 years for a whole cycle of precession. So eventually, winter will actually become summer.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because I think more people get tapped into astrology and learn this. It's not so easy for the powers that be to use global warming and say that this is having an effect because the stars don't lie and all astrology doesn't lie. But they're using it they're just using media outlets to manipulate and say that for certain things are the way they are because we've changed it. And it's not, it's written in stars as it is.
Well, nothing happens without the powers that be in terms of celestial.
Yeah.
So if there's global warming, it's because it's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
You know, if this is and I know it sounds, you know, really awful to say, if there's an earthquake, it's because it's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And many people might disagree with that because obviously there's catastrophes that happen and there's lives that have lost and stuff like that. But nature doesn't care about that, unfortunately, you know, and nature doesn't really have a heart in that sense. It just does, and it just is. And it is not something that's persuaded by emotion or anything. It follows a pattern.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why it's really important, in my opinion, to know astrology, even if it's just a little bit, because it takes away that confusion. It sometimes provides a sense of comfort for people. You know, I think one of the big things that people often ask, because again, astrology is linked to spirituality and that kind of stuff. You know, if there's a God, why is there so much evil in the world? And it's because God is not a person. God is an energy. It's the overarching life force. And you know, and these horrible things happen. Like people lose children really early on and in unfair ways. And it's because of the energy that child was born through. It's not the parents' fault, it's not the child's fault, it's the universe and how it was set up in the moment of that child's birth. So, again, back in the day, a lot of people would go to astrologers to say, you know, when is it a good time to conceive, or you know, when is it a good time to have a baby, and that kind of stuff. Or if they were pregnant, they would go to an astrologer to see, you know, what would the energy would be like when the child's due to be born and that kind of thing. So it's being used for some great things. It's, you know, on a global level, on a mundane level, on a personal level. It's just, I don't think there's enough words that I could use to describe what it is. It's undescribable.
I think it's really interesting though, because like even when you go back to medical, like you say, surgeons used to have to study astrology. So if they were doing open heart surgery, they'd have to make sure that it wasn't in Leo because it'd be more pumping of blood and the fatality. And I bet, well, data don't lie. If you go and have a look at that and when in them certain signs of that happening, people are bleeding out on the
well, that has to do with the waxing and the waning of the moon. So when the moon's full, obviously it has the most gravitational pull. So when you are going for surgery and it's a full moon, they tell you to not if you can, because there's more chances of hemorrhage and bleeding out and things like that. So it's good to wait a few days after a full moon to go for surgery so that the body can heal in the way that it needs to. Also, it depends how the moon's aspected. So an aspect in astrology means that the moon, let's just stick to the moon, is having relations with other planets. And if it has hard aspects, which is often called a square or an opposition, it means that it could be a difficult time for surgery because there are planets that are opposing it, there are planets that are working against it or causing a sense of conflict. So again, you'd have to have your chart read for that. But then there's also things called easy aspects. And there's no such thing as a good or a bad aspect, just hard and easy. And an easy aspect is a sextile or a trine, which means that there is a nice flow of energy. So these planets are assisting the healing process rather than working against it.
Yeah, going against the grain.
In this country, we get days of operation on whenever, you know. Of course, if it's an emergency, you know, there's things that people put in place to prevent that happening. But if you're given a choice to opt for certain dates, then it would be a good time to see an astrologer.
Is that something then, I know that you said that your mother had surgery a bit ago, is that something when they gave the dates of it, is that something that you assisted and said, well, let me have a little look at this first before you go
Well,
ahead?
I didn't, because my mum worries. She's like a worrywart. But in actual fact, my mum was scheduled to have open heart surgery, and at the time it was a full moon, and I remember saying to my sister, I really don't want her to have this surgery.
Yeah.
She was a nervous wreck. And because I looked at the astrology, I thought to myself, I really didn't want her to have this surgery.
Yeah.
Anyway, by chance, the surgery was cancelled, and it was shifted back by about a week.
Were you doing rituals, were you?
Yeah, I really was praying to Diana. But I was actually really pleased, because then she had the surgery and it was without complications. Now, it could have been a totally different story. We don't know, because it didn't happen. But sometimes it's just not worth the risk. In my opinion, some of the things that I've manifested from the astrology, and it's always easier to see after it's happened.
Yeah,
you can use it as for a predictive, divinatory practice, but it's always easier to see when these things have come to pass. But I was quite glad that she didn't have the surgery at that time.
Because I think we discussed it a bit ago about someone saying, "Oh, I don't really like to look at charts, or I wouldn't really make decisions off the back of that." And I kind of looked at it and said, "Well, I don't know that much. I ask you about certain events because it helps me out. I look at it as the way that my mind looks at it is if I were to go on a hike, would I check the weather before going on a 6 hour hike where I'm going to put myself in danger? Would I look if it was storms of raining? And I would. So when there's big events coming up, I like to cross-examine with yourself, so I get a better idea and see if it's a good day to do what it is.
Well, there's always more than one thing going on in a chart. You can't just look at one planet and say, right, that's there, that means it's going to be a bad day for that. There's lots of different relationships that these planets are having. So you might look at the planet that rules that specific thing, and it actually looks like it's in a poor placement, or the aspects are not very good and that kind of thing. But then you may have something else going on in the other side of the chart that actually compensates that. So it's like a balancing act. That is really what it is. If there's loads of indicators that this is not a good thing, then that's the astrologer's job to tell you that. However, it's such an intricate tool. It's a lot of people approach it like it's very basic. It's not. There's so much that you need to take into consideration when you're looking at these things, which is why there's so many books being written on it. And people will, great minds like Carl Jung and all of them, big into psychology and that kind of stuff, studied astrology like day in, day out for years and years to try to see these repeating patterns and these things and these processes and what they found and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with being prepared. And at the end of the day, we all have free will. We do have free will, but it's a chart of potential, and it's about harnessing energy. And if you're going to do the rituals every time the full moon's out, why would you not do the rituals of the other planets? They're not less important. They just carry very different energy. The sun and the moon, again, being luminaries, are the closest things to us, so they represent things that are very personal. For example, the mother and the father. The planets that are a little bit further out represent other areas of life that are still relative to us, but they're just not as important as like your immediate being.
Do you think as well, maybe just because it feels like it's only just getting to the surface level of spirituality, because it is very surface level, people are only doing surface level stuff of the moon because it's something that can visually see? Do you think like now astrology, people are starting to get into the nitty gritty and they start to look further down because that is what's controlling it all? To a certain degree.
Well, I feel like your knowledge will only take you as far as, if that makes sense, of what you've put in. Spirituality, even though on a collective level we are waking up to it again, it's a very independent practice. And again, we can discuss the moon ritual side of that, but it's very independent, and people's understanding of this stuff is very much determined, in a sense, if you want to use that word, by their own chart. Because if you've got Mercury, which rules the mind and the way that we think and understand, in a sign such as Pisces or in the 12th house, which is a house of illusions and things that are unseen, and it is the house that rules spirituality and the dark waters of the universe. So think of the sky that the stars actually sit in, that's Pisces. So people's perception gets lost. Yeah. They can become confused. They don't understand it. It boggles the mind, and it's because in their astrological chart, potentially that's not what their path is. They're not here to understand all of that stuff. They're here for another reason. They're here for another purpose. So there'll be placements and things in another part of their chart that will describe what it is that they're here to do. So even though it would be great if everybody woke up, and some people you do just want to shake by the neck. Sometimes they'll be like, open your eyes. That's not what they're sent here in this lifetime to do. Maybe in a past lifetime, I've got Pluto in my 12th house in Scorpio, and the 12th house is symbolic of past life and karma. And so that tells me that in my past life I was a very powerful mystic, because that's what the 12th house rules, and Pluto rules power and it rules transformation. It also rules destruction. Yeah. So, and I had quite a destructive breakdown, which led me into this. I went to a very dark place, which was Pluto, to come out the other side, because the 12th house is also the house of transcendence and transcending something. And the things that go into the 12th house usually need to be processed and worked through so that you can gain and benefit from them in this lifetime when you move into the first house, which naturally would be Aries, the conscious mind. Yeah. So that's how astrology affects us. We all have a zodiac wheel in our minds. We all have one in our solar plexus, and women in the womb as well, which is how children are formed. Yeah. So it's, again, you'll see how kind of deep it can get. It's not just about these big balls floating around above our head that we can't see. It reflects inwardly as well.
The thing as well, like, how important do you think it is to have a natal chart? Because I know when I first got in touch with yourself and you gave me a natal chart, and we didn't know each other at all, didn't give you any background for you to do on me, and I remember you telling me, you said you have lactic acid build up, and your dad's a builder, and you're also a builder, and I'm like, how do you know all this?
She's stalking me.
And at that moment in time, I was very, what's the word? Skeptical of what were coming out, but when you were telling me about that I have acid reflux all the time, and I'm like, how does you know? And you're like, it's in your chart, it's within your chart that I know that. I'm like, how does someone, just by reading where I was born in a certain time frame, know all that? So
it's a language. It's the language of the heavens. Is really what astrology is. And again, this is going to be an unpopular opinion. It's just my opinion. Anyone that is conducting any spiritual practice should have knowledge of this. One of the things is, again, with regards to crystals, everybody uses crystals nowadays. I've got crystals in my hair. In actual fact, a lot of people have crystals all around their home, and they don't really know what crystals they are. They just look nice. It's the aesthetic of them, which is fine. However, you need to understand that crystals do have a magnetic field, electromagnetic field, and if your chart is set up, because each planet rules crystals, you'll have, for example, Saturn rules things like black tourmaline because it rules the colour black. So if you have Saturn, which is not well aspected in your chart, let's just say, and you have a crystal that is enhancing that energy, that's going to bring you bad vibes, not good vibes. So when people are going for things like Reiki, or they're actually purchasing crystals and they're carrying them and things like that, that's why it's really important to know what your chart is, because even though that crystal is good for that, in your chart it's poorly aspected, so you could actually be manifesting bad things carrying that crystal around, not just good things. So again, it's really important for people to have a natal chart reading. It's really important. It determines everything in your life, really, all areas of life, your health, your vitality, how you understand, how you think, how you function, how you operate. It represents your social scope, your social lens, how people view you, so that you can, if you're somebody that's told or has been told your whole life, like I have, that you're bossy and you're loud.
Yeah.
And I used to hate that, to be quite honest, but in actual fact it makes a lot of sense to me. It's not that I'm bossy and loud, it's just that I like to know, I like to be very clear, so I'm a very direct speaker. So when I speak to people, I speak to them in a very direct way, but I didn't realise before astrology that not everybody not everybody responds to that well. Some people like a much more passive approach, or some people like you to be a bit more, quieter and that. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because of how they are set up cosmically, basically. And then I also discovered that I'm an Aries, and Aries are the warriors, they're the ones that go out, and they're the first sign of the zodiac, so they basically carry the rest of the zodiac. So they need to be forceful, they need to be like a force to be reckoned with, because if you imagine that tiny little spark has to, blaze its way all through all 12 signs, it needs to have some type of force behind it. So that's why my speech is quite forceful. In my chart, I have it in the 3rd house, which is the house of communication. So it's not that I'm being aggressive and intentionally.
No, I like the directness of it anyway.
I like the passive.
I appreciate it.
You let me talk.
But no, I thought it was funny because of the experience that you looked at my natal chart the other day, and we were going through what we were going to talk about in the conversation coming up, and I were on about you'd listed a few things at me, and you were saying, it's reflecting back on childhood, uncles, and I'm like, well, my uncle's he's going through a bad time, sadly passed away recently. And then you were like, and you also like to get out and you like to do all these things, but you need to be grounded. You're like not feet in earth, but you need to be at home. And I went out on a hike on Saturday, and my ankle gave way, and I was like, and straight away I was sat side of the road, I couldn't continue, 2 lads have had to go back. And you also said it were a reflective time, and I was sat there and I thought, 7-8 years ago, which is again 7-year cycles, since I last did it, I did it with 2 other friends, and one of them hurt themselves. And
was that 7 years?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I went and I says, look, I want to do it in this time, being all in my own head, wanted to conquest it myself. And as I was sat outside the road, I thought, I were a twat. I should have just... And so I rang him as soon as I got back, and I was like, I'm sorry, mate, I know how that felt now, and I'm sorry. And he went, it's great to be able to have this conversation. So I thought, what you said in that natal chart and what we're going on the planets is what played out, even though Craig likes to go against it and still go out and do what he's doing. I got humbled very quickly, but there were a lot of lessons within it, and I was just sat laughing, and I remember coming back and telling Zoe, and she was like,
it's always really interesting when you say these things, because you never really know how it's going to happen. So you can say things like, you need to be at home, you need to be grounded, and that kind of stuff. But you don't realise when that moment's going to come that you realise, I should have just stayed home. You know what I mean? So it's always funny when you get clients that come back and say, well, do you remember when you said this, and do you remember when you said that? And then they tell me the story, and it's always different, it's always different. I've never really met anyone where I've interpreted something for them and they've come back and told me the same story. It's always very, very different. So it's interesting, and it really, that's what it is. It's a big grand clock. It's a clock that you can...
Because also, that I see it as well for me, that's the universe also confirming what I've been told to delve further into astrology, to get a better understanding of myself, of finding the best path for me to go down. I'm not saying each path, it might even take me down a path where there's a lot of turmoil, but it is very necessary. And I think each time that you're given this information, it gives you a way for you to open your perception. To not take that as victim. I could have very easily that day when this is bollocks, this is all going on, but having that conversation, you showing me what were in my chart, I was sat there and I was side of the road trying to flank down people, and I was laughing about it still, even when I'm driving past. I went, no, it's good because this is reflective. I'm getting to see where I've come from and where I'm going. And it's
giving you that bit of reassurance that, again, you've got to trust the astrologer, just like you'd have to trust any practitioner of anything. But it's giving you reassurance that you can broaden your perspective, so that when you are going to these people for information and advice or guidance, that there is some truth in it.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know what that truth is, because you've experienced it,
Yeah.
you know, and again, it's, when you're an astrologer, it's very easy to say to someone, oh, well, you're going to walk up a mountain and you're going to do this and you're going to do that, you know, but really, that's not the job. The job is to give them, this is the type of dynamic that you could find yourself in. Because the actual, you know, I don't like to use it so much as predictive in that way.
Yes.
To tell somebody that this is going to happen for definite. I say it might, I say it may, but generally speaking, this is the energy. These are the kind of things that you can expect.
Just like guidelines, aren't
it's
they?
Guidelines,
but like you also say is, I wouldn't learn if it wasn't in the experience. It was through the experience that I'll learn the knowledge.
And I say, well, with everything, it's a lesson or a blessing.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's a blessing, that is symbolic of a trine in astrology. It's like a flow. 9 times out of 10, we don't really acknowledge our blessings.
Yeah.
We just take them for granted. But if it's a lesson, that's when you have to sit and shut up and go, all right, I need to learn something from this. And then that's when you become reflective, or at least you should. And if you don't, then those things are going to keep coming up, because there is cycles that happen in your chart, and that planet's going to keep getting knocked and bumped until you learn that lesson in different ways. But ultimately, it's going to be the same entity, the same energy that you're not acknowledging, that needs to be worked through, basically. Saturn returns a big one for people. You know, Saturn is what governs your life, basically, and so people have a midlife crisis when they get to like the 40s. Because they're having like a Saturn return, and when Saturn comes in opposition, we'll find ourselves up against like a lot of hardships and things like that, because it's the planet of discipline. And if you don't listen to the teachings of Saturn, you best believe Saturn's going to show you. It really does show you. It really does get you in a headlock. It's old father time, and old father time sits and says, we can do this for as long as you want. But you
We've got as long as you need.
Lesson. Yeah, basically. And I think you have about 3 Saturn returns every year. In a lifetime, you have about 3 Saturn returns, unless you live quite long. And these are kind of, Saturn's the biggest teacher. It's the one where every 28 to 30 years, you sit there and go, wow, I've actually been through a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just the return that teaches you. It will form other aspects like a square, difficult, challenging, then it'll form a trine, then, you know, and all of these different aspects, these points of analysis in a chart. So it's almost like looking at a clock. You've got 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Well, you can imagine 12 and 3 would create a square if you drew lines to all of them. But then obviously there's a relationship between 12 and 1. There's a relationship between 12 and 2. So they are different types of aspects. And again, they're points of analysis. So when you're starting something out, let's say, for example, at the moment, let's say it's a new moon, and you've got the sun and moon in conjunction sat next to each other, that's going to bring in energy of whatever sign it's sat in. And then you might start a project around that time. But then when it gets to a sextile, which means the moon has moved past the sun, and it's like 60 degrees away from the sun, the sextile is kind of a moment of opportunity, and it's like, right, since I've started this project, how far have I come? So it's a point of analysis.
Yeah.
And at that point, you'll either say, right, this isn't working, let me change a few things. But it's not that difficult to change because you've just started it, or you'll say, do you know what, this seems to be going well, I'm going to carry on. And then it'll carry on, and then it'll get to the square aspect, which is 90 degrees away from that original conjunction. Yeah. And when you get to that 90-degree angle, that's a challenge. So it'll be like, right, I've been doing what I've been doing, and it's been working well till now, but I'm at a point where I'm a little bit stuck. Yeah. So again, I need to analyse this. Or if you ignored the fact that it wasn't working in the first place, when you get up to that square, you're going to know about it, because that's when things are just going to go to shit, basically. So again, you're going to have to analyse that, and you might end up having to start all over again. And then it'll move to the trine and then the opposition. And then that's similar to a full moon, because now you're looking at how far you've come. It's almost like you're looking at yourself.
Yeah.
That's the point when the transition happens again, but on the opposite end of the scale. So then it'll form a sextile, then a square, and then a trine, and then the process, and then it'll come full cycle.
Yeah.
So then that's really how you navigate each planetary aspect in your chart. You know, it's always kicking up new dust, and it's always releasing, you know, and that's really what you find in life. You'll take on new tasks and new challenges, but things will fall away at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that we need to do is to learn how to process and balance that. Sometimes we get very attached to the things that are falling away, and sometimes we're very resistant to the things that are coming in, or sometimes we'll get overly attached to something that we perceive is going to come in, you know, and then, but at the same time we don't want to let go of anything, and this is really where astrology comes in as a really useful tool of now's the time. You know, you will feel it within yourself. You don't ever really go, you know, if an astrologer came along and said, look, you've got really good aspects, you're going to be a millionaire if you go out and buy a lottery ticket. You don't go out then and spend all your life savings on lottery tickets. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to have some sense of groundedness to you and that kind of thing. But buying one ticket, if you can afford it, is not going to do any damage, you know, and if your luck comes in, your luck comes in. So it's all about you also playing a role. It isn't just given, your power isn't given to the astrologer. You know, your astrologer is basically just a guide, and it does rely on you and what it is that you want to believe and take away from that reading, and what you don't think is relevant.
Yeah, because another thing, I know like this generation and a lot of people hold money up to this high thing and a high aspect. But if we're starting to, what I've started to do with mine is like go to the root cause of it and look at the people who have got the money. The people who've got the money, and I think it's
more than likely got astrologers.
Yeah, well, this is what we're getting to. I can't remember if it's Rockefeller that said it. He said, millionaires don't study astrology, billionaires do.
Yeah.
So I think when people are holding all this money up and chasing the money, they should maybe be chasing around and having a look at the nitty gritty stuff first.
Absolutely. Well, wealth isn't always financial.
No.
You know, to some
It's
people,
health
is wealth.
I'd say that's
if you don't have health, you don't have wealth, because you can't pursue money if you don't have good health. If you're laid in a hospital bed because you've eaten crap all your life or whatever reason, you know, you can want money as much as you want. You're not going to get it because you can't.
It's not going to buy your days. Like.
No, and I think with good health also comes good mindset. It comes good discipline. It comes good practice. It comes, you know, it comes with a lot of benefits. It isn't just the fact that, you know, I'm eating good, therefore I'm losing weight.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good thing. You don't want too much weight on your body because obviously it has its downsides. However, I don't think that people realise that by having a good diet and by taking in, you're not really eating the food. It's not the food, it's what's in the food.
The energy.
You know, it's the minerals and vitamins and everything that goes into the body are catalysts for chemical processes to take place.
Yeah.
So if your body is deficient, let's just say if your body is deficient in magnesium or something along those lines.
Mango.
Yeah. If your body's deficient in those things, then the processes that are supposed to happen naturally within the human body cannot happen, and therefore you become sick.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to have a balanced diet. Now, astrology is a very good tool to use to figure out what diet you should have.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows that you shouldn't be eating too much sugar, but if you've got Venus aspected in your chart by Jupiter or something like that, and it's in a house that rules food, and you know there's all this stuff going on, you'll be able to see that this client or this person or this native struggles with sugar or something along those lines. You need to balance that out so you can actually offer advice and guidance. I've done a bit of a course on personal training and nutrition as well, so I have a bit of understanding about the diet and the food and how it works and how these things work in the body, so you can actually see that in a chart, so you can develop food, you know, diet plans and things like that, or at least give them some type of indication as to what kind of foods they need to be eating, because it contains this certain substance and therefore it should remedy whatever it is you're afflicted with. I don't ever advise people to take medicine. I'm not a doctor, you know, I don't do that, but food's food. and
Food
plants,
is the medicine,
plants
isn't
are
it?
plants. So I'm not going to not tell someone to not eat spinach if it's showing in the chart that they would benefit from eating spinach because it's got a lot of iron. I eat a lot of spinach because I'm an Aries, and Aries rules iron. And it's the brain and it's the head and it's the mind, and iron is the most used the most used up thing in the human body. It's the catalyst for a lot of other chemical processes. So if the body's deficient of iron, it's deficient of other things because these other processes can't happen. And so that, again, you can see that in the chart, and that ties in very much with the medical astrology. It's astrohomeopathy, I think it's called. Don't say that. Put my teeth back in. But really, what you're doing is you're determining the health of the native. That's what you call them in astrology. You're determining the health of the native, and you're giving them ways to remedy illnesses, but also to maintain a healthy balance, a healthy lifestyle and that kind of thing. You know, there's people that'll have like deficiencies with elements. You know, somebody could be very deficient of fire in their chart. So quite naturally, these will be people that will seek out conflict, seek out challenge. These are people that are quite combative and argumentative because they are deficient in that element. They have to seek it out in the outside external world
to create the emotions for the fire.
So that they have a complete set of elements. If somebody has a deficiency in air, you'll find that these are people that tend to like to learn a lot. They're very much people. If that makes sense.
People pleasers.
People eaters. So they'll tend to be into things like debate, you know, and again arguments, but for a cause, if that makes sense. You know, there'll be knowledge behind it rather than just conflict. They might read a lot of books, you know, they'll have interests in things of like an academic nature, basically, and they're very they're like abstract concepts because they like to think about stuff. So wherever there is a lack of an element in somebody's chart, you will often see it very clearly in somebody, even if it's subconscious to them.
So you can point them in the right direction, really.
Absolutely.
That's what it's kind of doing.
Absolutely. Because they might say, you know, I'm a water sign and I'm very passive and this, that and the other, but, you know, there's people out there that would say that I'm quite aggressive and I'm always trying to cause problems. And this native would get upset because they're actually very empathic, and it's like, it really upsets me that people think this of me, and it's almost like it doesn't make sense. But because they're lacking fire in their chart, that's why they will try to compensate for that by being argumentative. But in their mind, that's not what they're doing. They're trying to understand on an empathic level, why are you like that? You know, so they don't. So it's again,
like a reflection.
And that's where the moon comes in, because the moon is very passive and it's very subconscious. So it really talks about that side of ourselves that quite often we don't even notice is there, and we don't even see that's there. The sun is very prominent, which is why everybody knows what their star sign is. It's not a star sign; it's a sun sign. But that's what it is. So and that's a lot of what astrology has been marketed at. Pop culture astrology, it's called, where you pick up a magazine and then you read your star sign, and then you go, right, that doesn't sound anything like my life, and then you put it down, and then you just disregard it altogether. But it's almost like that doesn't mean that it isn't relevant. And I've used some type of a theory of, just because if you ordered a Chinese and it showed up in a pizza box, it doesn't automatically make a lot of food a pizza.
People also want to hear what they want to hear.
And they'll see what they want to see. And also, depending on their astrology, that is exactly what they will see and hear, you know? So it does take a little bit of persuasion sometimes with people, but in actual fact, I've realised it's not my job to persuade people, it's my job to just interpret the chart, and whether they want to believe it or not, that's really down to them. You know, you can use this information or you can completely throw it in the bin. It's really down to you. Some people come to me because they're just interested. Some people, I mean, it's quite fun when you get a skeptic like yourself. And then all of a sudden they want to know everything. So that's amazing, because then you end up kind of teaching and that kind of stuff, and then getting to know them on a deeper level, because you're opening up different aspects of that person's nature. So that's always a good thing. But then you'll just have these, downright skeptic. If someone's got heavy energy, heavy Saturn in their chart, Saturn's the skeptic. Saturn doesn't want to believe. It's like, no, come back with hardcore, solid evidence. that I can, give me something and I'll believe it. And with astrology, unfortunately, you can't really do that apart from what actually manifests in their material world. And even then, they're probably like, that's a bit strange, because you just can't get away from it. It's amazing, to be quite honest.
It's got to be when they're ready to see it as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what, just as I'm heading towards it, I wanted to know a bit more about sacred secretion and how that lines up, because obviously it's a 2.5, saying obviously, most people won't know, I didn't know until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It's when your sun sign moves into your moon sign.
It's when your moon moves into your sun sign. Yeah.
Opposite way around.
Almost.
Still learning.
It's confusing though, because it is, when you look at astrology and you look at a chart, it's dynamic.
Yeah.
It looks like a screenshot, it looks like a picture, but in actual fact, to the untrained eye, that's exactly what it is. To the astrologer, these things are constantly moving. It's like cogs on a clock, and they're constantly ticking. But with the sacred secretion, that really links to anatomy and how we can use the moon to heal and what it's supposed to be used for. And this also ties into the moon rituals that people do on a monthly basis. So every 28 and a half days, the moon completes a full cycle around your chart. And the moon, throughout that cycle, will pass your sun in the sign that you were born. So for example, I'm an Aries, you're a Virgo. At the point that the moon is conjunct with the sun, so next to the sun, it is at its most vulnerable state. Now think about the sun is a big ball of fire, and the moon is quite small and tiny in comparison, Think of the moon being sizzled up by the sun and fried, and that's really what happens if that sacred seed is not protected. The moon represents motherhood and it represents children. So what happens is the claustrum, which is kind of like a thin layer of matter or skin, or think of it like that, in the brain. I'm pretty sure it sits near the temples and it under both hemispheres. And basically, this claustrum will release this fluid. Basically, the fluid comes from the pineal and the pituitary gland, and in the Bible, it's named milk and honey.
Milk and honey.
Ambrosia or something. The milk and the honey. And what happens is this milk and honey, just like when a man and woman fornicates, they merge, and it creates life germ. And in actual fact, without sounding too crude, this is semen. This is what semen is, semen secretion. So this fluid moves through the spine, and then what happens is it finds itself in the solar plexus. In the solar plexus, in the body, there is a dint, and it's almost the shape of the moon. It's like if you pushed your thumb into some Play-Doh, it creates like an imprint. That's the shape of the solar plexus. It's also the shape of the moon. And what happens is the seed sits there and it lays dormant for 3.5 days. Interestingly enough, in astrology, when the sun gets to the highest and lowest points of the sky in the sign of Capricorn and Cancer, it actually moves sideways for 3.5 days before it continues on its cycle.
Cool.
So that's kind of like when we have like Christmas and we have holidays and it's really dark, and basically dark nights and that kind of thing. There's 3.5 days where the sun it'll move sideways, and then it'll start to dip again and continue on its path. That happens within. So on the approach to this process, when the sun and moon conjoin in your sign, you should be fasting. You should be abstaining from sex. You should be doing everything to protect that sacred seed, that sacred life germ. What happens if you do that? So 2.5 days before, 2.5 days after the exact conjunction, and your astrologer would be able to tell you that, but then you can also map it online. There's things, there's means to do that now. You should be at your most alkaline state, so you shouldn't be eating foods like curries and things like that.
Anything acidic, really.
Really, yeah.
Most food is acidic.
So if you do a fast, drink water, things like that are just really kind to the digestive system, it's going to protect the sacred seed. And what happens is that gets pushed back up the spine and it goes back to the brain. And because of its potency, it will create an enlightenment, basically. It's feeding the brain, so to speak. The life seed is the thing that kind of rids parasites. It creates a healing process. You'll find a lot of athletes that practice semen retention.
A lot of boxers as well.
For that reason.
The power.
For that reason, because it's creative germ, and if you are not squandering it, then it will rejuvenate and regenerate, and it regenerates the mind, and it makes you brighter, and it makes you smarter, and it improves your skin, and your overall vitality, basically. Yeah. This is why, in the Bible, again, religion has corrupted it somewhat. It says that, you know, sex is a sin. And it isn't the fact that you shouldn't just be having sex and they don't want you to do that. Yeah. Sex is considered a sin on the body. Yeah. Because what you're doing is you are sacrificing that life germ, you know, and you will find that somebody that has been heavily sexed throughout their life, let's just say, tend to age a lot faster. Yeah. Women that have had a lot of children will look more, you know, they'll age quicker, and it's because they have sacrificed part of themselves to create life outside of themselves. So it's considered a sin on the soul, you know, and that's why sex should be practiced in order to bring forth life. Yeah. You know, there is things like with masturbation and stuff like that. You can use that to be close with the partner, but it's not supposed to be ejaculatory.
Well, that's why it's free, and that's why there's an attack on in the to freely do it. The other thing as well that I did notice, because when I touched on the sacred secretion, I was getting into it, I realised that I was divinely doing it over them times anyway, without knowing astrology, and obviously then I got more into it. And there's another thing that can destroy the secretion, it's anger. Yeah. It's for the cortisol. As soon as you get angry, it can destroy it within seconds.
Yeah. And this is why meditation is so important. And I think when people are practicing spirituality, you know, meditation and things like amazing things can come from meditation. And I actually believe it's the one reason why I'm able to do the things that I'm able to do today with my mind. In terms of understanding astrology, it's very, very complex, and a lot of people will probably just give up before they've gotten to the point where they need to be. And just like visualising and things like that, it's difficult to begin with because you do have to quiet the mind. But what people don't realise is there is a whole chemical process that's taking place in the brain, and some chemicals are more destructive than others. So when you are activating a different nervous system, because you've got your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, those are systems that release different chemicals. When you go to sleep on a night, you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, I believe. And so there's all of these different chemical processes happening that are actually renewing, you know. That's why we go to rest and we go to sleep and we renew and we wake up revitalised. When you're going into meditation, that's really what you're trying to activate is your parasympathetic nervous system to bring about these chemical processes. And through meditation, it's a state of deep concentration. These chemical processes react. They react, and then they create like a in your brain, and you go aha, and you have that eureka moment. That's really why we meditate. You will get monks and you know, all these different spiritual people that will sit for hours. They won't speak. They won't move. They don't do anything. They will fast for days on end.
What's it called? It's I'm not going to do it justice. The name. It's a passing over, isn't it? It's called. It's where they do 7 to 11 hours per day. Yeah,
but even like the Passover, think of what it is that we've been talking about, the sacred secretion. It's allowing it to pass over. You need to let it pass over. Yeah. But cortisol is it is a destructive chemical in the body, because it's the stress hormone basically. And if you are somebody like me that carries a lot of weight on the stomach, that's because your cortisol levels are high, and I actually know mine are high because I've had mine tested. So you'll find people that have lots of different regulatory issues. One of the things to do is to try to balance those. If you try to balance your hormones, you will have optimal health. Everything is determined by the hormones, male and female hormones. that's really what astrology can help you do.
Yep.
Every planet rules hormones. You know, the moon in particular rules riboflavin, I believe. Venus rules estrogen. And funnily enough, when women get contraceptive pills, it's got riboflavin in it. So it's really interesting because I actually looked and I did a bit of research into it. You know, Mars rules things like cortisol because it's the adrenal glands.
Yeah.
So it also rules testosterone and the male hormones and that kind of stuff. Then you've got your estrogen and that kind of stuff. But if you've got something in your chart, which I did actually do a chart reading for somebody before, which was Mars out of bounds, and what that means is Mars is its furthest point away from the ecliptic.
Yep.
Which is the balanced point in the sky, and their hormones were completely out of whack, and they were always angry, and they'd have fits of, you know, violent
Rage,
outbursts and rage and stuff, and they could just not get their anger under control. And I said, it's because your Mars is out of bounds.
Yeah.
You're not able to dictate what Mars does in your chart. You just can't. So when someone ticks you off, they tick you off, and it can be sudden and it can be unexpected. And it depends on what the planets are doing at the moment. If a planet's triggering that Mars, you're going to feel frustrated all the time. Yeah. And you're not going to have any idea why, because you're not relating to it, because it's so far out.
Yeah.
If Mars was very close to the equator, let's just say, then you'd know straight away, you're pissing me off.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So again, and then that can cause your cortisol levels to be sky high because you're getting stressed out and you're not knowing why, which will lead to a lot of nervous system conditions because you can't regulate it properly. So if you'll be in flight or fight mode all the time, so that's going to play a very vital part in regulating your nervous system. So again, astrology can be used to determine all of that stuff, which is kind of where I really like to gear myself towards. I find it very interesting, especially in regards to things like mental health, because if you understand the sacred secretion and you understand that the composition of the secretion is really what determines your mindset, just like the sacred secretion of somebody's semen determines the baby, because it's the male that determines the sex of the baby, you'll understand why it's important to keep it as pure as possible, because you want mental clarity. But you're not going to have mental clarity if your hormones are imbalanced and you're not doing anything to regulate them. That secretion is just going back to the brain, and it's just a cyclical process.
It's a funny thing as well, because people they think it's a throwaway thing, but it creates life. It creates life, and it's creating how you life. Think.
It's creating your life.
And you've got to get to a point where it's not controlling you; you control it to a certain degree. And the other thing, where you're on about the chemicals and stuff, I only recently tried it over the last few months. Is I used to just get up in darkness and go and meditate, and then I started to do my workouts first early morning and then sit meditate, and it just feels so much easier to relax in, whether it's because you've been heavy panting or whatever, and all these chemicals are kicking about, and as you sit and relax, all these chemicals are still having a fly around, and it's like cleaning your system out.
Yeah, basically, you know, some people do it first thing in the morning, some people do it in the evening. Again, that can kind of be determined by your chart, because you might be a diurnal person, which means that you have a lot of planets at the top of your chart, which means that most of the stuff that you do is like throughout the day. You're quite an objective person and you are very much concerned with out there. But then there's people that might want to do this stuff on an evening. Now I come awake on a night time. I'm like a night owl, so through the day I'm a bit like, don't really have much motivation and this kind of thing. And back in the day, that would affect me in terms of work and stuff, because I just had no energy. I just didn't have any energy. I didn't want to do any of it, and I just didn't like it. And I just thought, one of those people that just didn't like work. But in actual fact, what I've learned is I was born in the early hours. So in the evening, that's when my brain just switches on. And I like to study through the night, and I'll stay up through the night, and a lot of the readings that I do tend to be people that are overseas and they're on a different time zone. So for me that's better, because I'll stay up through the night and I'll talk to people, let's say in America, where they're up through our night, if that makes sense. I don't feel that bad about being lazy through the day anymore.
That also goes back to like when we were hunter-gatherers, like some people would watch out for over the night and make sure the tribe were alright, and others would do the morning shift.
Yeah, basically, and it's nothing's changed.
So I feel like when I went through this awakening, I was very much night owl, and I've gone opposite way now.
Way.
I'm now like early riser, and anyone who knows me, I didn't get out of bed early, and now I do.
Well, I used to get out of bed really early, and then I would often find myself depleted through the day. You know, obviously taking my son to school and nursery, and going to work and cleaning the house and doing all of that. And by the time evening came,
all fun stuff.
Like, basically. So then by the time evening came, I didn't really have the energy to want to sit and do any of the stuff that I actually enjoyed. I just wanted to just zone out. But by shifting my day, my working day, my pattern, I've found a method that works for me. So even if I am having a later morning, it doesn't really matter, because I think, well, I've had a later night because I've had to be up into the early hours speaking to someone. So where before I'd beat myself up over that, I don't so much now. Because I know that I've been busy that night, you know.
You've got to fuck around to find out,
basically. I mean, it took a lot of adjusting, but in actual fact, it doesn't mean to say that I do that every night. You know, I don't do that every night. I have early mornings sometimes, but it's helped me to navigate my work life and my schedule better without feeling guilty, whilst factoring in things that I actually enjoy doing as well. It's almost like it's open
finding the balance.
Because I know when I've got the most energy to do stuff. I know when I'm not going to want to do stuff, so then I just don't plan stuff like early in the morning. I am not a proactive person first thing. I need to have that time to myself. And then by late morning, early afternoon, I'm like, right, I can do my daily things. And then in the evening, when I'm winding down and my body's like, right, you know you don't need to go out the house yet now, you know you don't need to go there, and you don't need to worry about the shopping and all that stuff's being ticked off, that's when I can get into my meditative state and I can go, right, now let me do my work. So I'm the opposite. I need to get all the menial things out the way first so that I don't think about them.
And this all goes back to knowing thyself, isn't it?
Really, it's absolutely.
It's getting to know you more.
And
also, just a fun one that I wanted to touch on. In the Chinese zodiac, I know it might be something that, all the animals are animals that we know, the rat or whatever, but there's one mythological one, the dragon.
Right.
What do you think to that? Why would they have one mythological animal? Creature.
Well, it's the same.
Or do we just think, because I was reading the other day and they said, once we start ascending up, they can actually enter the realm that they were in, so they could be coming back. Oh, what's your thoughts on it? Just a fun thing to talk about, really.
Yeah.
What's your
It's really interesting that you're saying this, because I had a reading the other day with a lady and she said, I can see a dragon in your cup, and now you're talking about dragons. This is weird. So
I just call it reality now, mate.
I don't even say
everyone goes, it's just really weird. I'm like, no, it's just synchronicity.
No, it's just normal, it's just Monday. But yeah, in actual fact, I do have an interesting take. Chinese astrology is different to Western astrology.
Yes.
And again, you get Vedic astrology, which is like Indian astrology.
Ayurveda,
and that's Ayurveda is like the health
just
side of it.
Just went into it over there, and I thought it was really interesting, the chart.
Brilliant, really absolutely brilliant. And there is things that overlap between them, but generally speaking, it's more to do with different traditions. But I feel like the dragon as a mythological creature is kind of similar in Western astrology to Orpheus, which is a mythological sign. And people say, is it a sign or is it not a sign? Well, it sits between Scorpio and Sagittarius, I believe. It is a constellation, but it's not a sign, okay? And it could be deemed as the 13th sign. But in actual fact, the constellation is a man riding a snake. And really what it's symbolic of me is somebody that has mastered the universal forces of nature. Because a snake is something that is seen as deceptive and it can bite and that kind of thing. It represents the Kundalini and the rising of the Kundalini and that kind of thing. But it's almost like mastery over it because he's riding it. In astrology, Western astrology, the dragon is symbolic of Rahu and Ketu, which is also the north and the south node, which represents destiny and fate. So in Chinese astrology, again, just an idea, the dragon is a mythological creature that embodies all elements because it breathes fire, it's made of matter, Earth. It flies through the air, and water is the actual sky that it flies through, which would, it represents the universal waters. Yeah. So really what that is symbolic of is mastery over all the realms.
That's cool. That is cool.
It's kind of, there's no animal out there that would defeat a dragon. It's kind of like, it's a symbol of strength, and it's a symbol of resilience. And again, if it's tied to destiny and fate, it's almost like saying, like, it's your destiny to be the dragon, but your fate is written in the stars if you don't. If that makes sense.
No.
The only thing that's going to change that is you and what you put into that process.
Yeah.
So,
how disciplined you can be.
Yeah, basically. Because even if you took all the animals of the zodiac, they still wouldn't equate to the dragon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's quite symbolic of it's kind of like, you will find these similarities between different traditions. So it does talk to me about Orpheus, which is like the 13th constellation, but then you've got to go back to the lunar cycles because there was 13 months. So is there actually 13?
Yeah.
And
do we just think that do you think like our perceptions that just are open once we get to a collective part of where spirituality is more on board, and our eyes now may able to see other beings?
Well, I think
that's like just a fun way of me looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are they here already existing?
Yeah.
But we can't see them.
Well, you can.
Yeah.
You can, and one of the reasons why I say that is because I looked at people the same as everybody else before I deep dove into all this stuff. And now when I look at people, I can tell you're a Virgo, you're a Libra. I can see them. It's almost like seeing different breeds of human nature, and so you do look at people, your scope and your vision, and there's a thing called like a reptilian brain, the reptilian mind. It's almost like that is what you view life. You cannot take those glasses off once you put them on.
I thought that was fun in Matrix, because when he's actually plugged in to the reptile, it's showing him being unplugged of the reptile mind. Because it's all symbology, isn't it? It's just,
all symbology.
I watched Matrix back again about 6 months ago, and I know if I watched it again tomorrow, I'd look at it completely different
absolutely.
again.
Yeah, well, there's different minds. You've got the one of the two most basic what you can think of in like Western astrology as well. What it teaches is the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Well, the cerebrum is the front of the mind, which is where all your cognitive processes happen. So you're multitasking. This is the thing I struggle with, but you're multitasking and you're executive functioning and prioritising and getting tasks done, regulating your life. And then you have your cerebellum. Your cerebrum is ruled by Aries, your cerebellum is ruled by Taurus, and that's where your heart is. People think your heart's here, your heart's not here. That's not your heart, that's a valve, basically, for blood to pass through and to get cleaned. Your heart's in the back of your brain. Because it represents desires and the things that our animalistic nature wants to pursue. So things like food, things like material items, and it's our job as human beings to master the animal brain, the cerebellum. There's a lot of research that I've actually done into the cerebrum and the cerebellum in regards to spirituality and things like that, and there is connections there with people that have had damage to the C-spine, so the top of the spine, and how it can have an effect on different sensory systems within the brain, and it's really interesting because when people have lesions and tears from impacts, because when I was younger I had a brain injury, which is why I kind of got into all this stuff, but when people have certain tears and lesions in parts of their brain, if you understand that the brain's made up of very thin substances sometimes and connections and that kind of stuff, I thought it very interesting that neurons can pass into different parts of the brain that they're not supposed to get into.
Right.
Which is why some people have head injuries and they end up mad. And what they need to do, this is kind of a part of spiritual psychosis as well, is it's almost like blowing a fuse, but then you need to rebuild that network, and that's called neuroplasty. So a lot of people will go to therapists of some kind to retrain the brain to speak, to read, to learn after a brain injury. But what I found really interesting is while they're developing these new pathways, the old ones don't fix.
Yeah.
So they can still access different parts of their mind and get neurons to go and get messages from parts of their brain that other people can't.
Yeah.
And this is why I think that, you know, head injury is kind of one of the most common injuries. And how many times have you bumped your head when you haven't actually even been to have it looked at and stuff like that? And I think that that is what happens, what creates such a diverse network of individuals.
Yeah.
I think you're supposed to bang your head a few times.
Oh, definitely. I've done it multiple times. I was going to touch on as well, what's with the moon transits and individuals, how much of an impact does that have if someone's trying to conceive infertility?
Well, first of all, you've got to take the actual natal chart into consideration. Because let's just take the moon for example. The moon in the sign of Cancer loves being in Cancer, loves being in the 4th house because it's its natural house. You know, that's what the moon governs. It depends where the moon placement is. If the moon placement's in its fall or in its detriment, it's not very strong, basically. So that could have an impact on fertility. If the moon is having hard aspects, naturally, meaning things like Saturn, you know, Saturn delays, or Mars is quite disruptive. Mars causes problems and issues and inflammation and that kind of thing. That's going to have an impact on fertility. So hard aspects to the moon. Again, as when you're looking at a natal chart, it is just a screenshot of the sky at the moment that person was born. That's not to say that that person can't conceive, because the transits of the planets that are happening at the moment may bring about a very fertile period for that person. So again, they'd need to be seeing an astrologer, they'd need to have the chart read, they'd need to be seeing kind of what things are coming up.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask is, like, so say if a couple was struggling to fall on pregnant, would you ask to look at both the charts, or would you mainly be focused on the woman?
You look at both, because obviously it takes two to make a baby, and if you look at the woman's chart, it's actually Mars that represents the women's fertility,
right?
And it's Venus that represents male fertility, which you think
I would have thought opposite.
No, it's not. It's the opposite. It's confusing. So then you'd look at them independently, and then you'd look at them in what's called a synastry chart, and you'd see how the energy of those two people work together. You look at the houses that represent fertility. So the 5th house is a house of fertility. It represents children. It represents lovers, as in sexual partners, and it represents sexual pleasures, basically. But what we're trying to say here, the actual action, the actual physical action of it. And then you'd look to things like the 7th house is the house of the partner. The 8th house is the house of intimacy. Because again, it takes a certain level of intimacy to be able to be receptive and that kind of thing, you know, and that doesn't mean mentally, like, I accept this partner. Your body could reject somebody without you even realising. So you need to look at all of that, and you need to look at, there will be aspects that show that if somebody's struggling with fertility, you need to look at the condition of the moon, you need to look at Mars and Venus. Again, they represent the masculine and feminine hormones. You need to look at the house placements and that kind of thing, and then also on top of that you can then put a third chart and look at the current transits. It could be that there is something, let's say for example, we'll keep it simple. Let's say that we've got the moon in the 5th house, and the moon in the 5th house is, you know, represents children and fertility, that kind of thing. But then you've got hard aspects from that other person's Mars or that other person's Venus to the moon, so that's going to have an impact on it. And then you've got a really slow planet like Saturn, or relatively slow should we say, planet like Saturn moving through that house in a transit. That's going to cause delays. So not only is the hard aspects to the moon, Saturn's basically saying, and even more so. If Saturn was replaced with something like Jupiter is a very fertile planet. It represents Zeus, and Zeus had loads of kids. So if Zeus was transiting the moon, even though these hard aspects, again, you need to look at the condition of the planets that are bringing those aspects and the condition of Jupiter and what sign it's in, because that might override the hard aspects.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, and then you've got to look at the degrees, because depending on what degrees they're sat at, because every sign has 30 degrees, that can play into it as well.
Yeah.
You know, but then you may at that point start to offer the native or the couple. You might start to offer them remedies and say, well, this will improve your fertility.
Try this
will
try
improve
that
fertility. Yeah, and this is a good time to try this, and this transit's happening throughout these dates. So why don't you try to conceive on this date? And it is basically just a playing around. You know, you look. It's called electional astrology. So when you pick specific dates for things, you can look at the astrology in the future, and then again you could do it against the native chart. And just say, well, this looks like a very fertile time, so at this time, this is when you really want to be trying to be conceived. Yeah.
Because the other question that I'm going to lead on to as well is tissue salts, and how they work and how we're deficient in them, and also that I'm guessing that can play a role in fertility as well.
Absolutely.
If you're both deficient.
Yeah, so again, you need to, rather than just considering somebody's chart, you also need to be asking questions about things like the diet and stuff, because even though you can kind of get an idea in the chart of what the diet's like,
or what they are at face value, but
there could
you don't
be
know
somebody that's really big into sugar. There could be somebody that's, and sugar causes a lot of problems in women because it can create polycystic ovaries and things like that. So again, there could be underlying health factors, which again, astrology, along with the aid of the client, you'll be able to figure it out. It's almost like a dialysis of a sort. Tissue salts, basically, each sign of the zodiac represents a different tissue salt, because each sign of the zodiac represents a different body part, a different circulatory system, glands, everything. The whole map of the human body can be read on a chart, basically. So Dr. Schussler, I think his name was, I think he was a German doctor. What he did is he conducted an experiment, and he actually, it's not a very nice story in a sense, but it was for science, it was for research. And what he did is he tested the ashes of a body that had been cremated to find that it only composed 12 salts. So he determined that the human body, in all of its organs and its functions, were determined by these 12 salts. So he basically said, if the body is deficient in any of these 12 salts that the body needs, which are called inorganic salts, meaning that we have to put them into our body through diet, through food, that kind of thing, there's going to be sickness and illness. So he ran some experiments, and obviously now tissue salts are used holistically to aid and heal and that kind of thing. So each star sign comes with its own salt, and if you were born, let's take me because it's easy and it's the first zodiac sign. If you were born in the sign of Aries, generally speaking, dependent on where in those 30 degrees you were born, you will be deficient in 3 to 4 salts. The salt for Aries is caliphos, which really governs the brain. It's a salt that the brain needs, and it's very deficient in a lot of people. People that are deficient in caliphos will suffer with things like migraines. They'll be fatigued easily. They'll even start to possibly get white spots on their eyes. Lots of different common ailments you can develop from a lack of this salt. They'll also be deficient in the Taurus salt and the Gemini salt. Now, Taurus governs the throat and it governs the nose, and Gemini is the arms and the lungs. So Taurus governs the body, so there'll be issues with possibly even retaining food to a sense. There may be certain aversions that you have to food. There might be certain foods that your body needs and you just can't eat. It can be as simple as that. Gemini rules the respiratory system, so you could suffer with respiratory conditions, things like chest infections and that kind of thing. because you're deficient in the Gemini salt. And this can continue for a lot of people. And what you need to understand is there is also a sister sign. So the sister sign to Aries is Libra. So the deficiency in caliphos, for example, could actually lead to hormonal imbalance because Libra regulates the ovaries, it represents the kidneys, and it represents the liver. So there could be things with regards to the liver not filtering properly what it needs to filter. And I know that this has been true with me because I've got polycystic ovaries, or previously have had polycystic ovaries, because you can heal polycystic ovaries. And it was through deficiency. Basically, my liver wasn't able to function like it's supposed to because I was deficient in the mineral that it needs to function. So basically, the tissue salts are food for the organs.
What's the most natural food that you can get? What is it that you said you were deficient in?
Caliphos.
Caliphos
is basically iron.
Is it?
Yeah,
so
iron.
Again, like you were saying, spinach.
Yeah, spinach. So you want like leafy green vegetables or high in iron. So again, you can get all of the vitamins and minerals can be obtained through food. But one of the problems is if you are naturally deficient, I'll go into it a bit deeper. So when a child is in the womb of the mother, the child's only in there for 9 months. So from the point of conception to the point of birth, more or less, the child's only in the womb for 9 months. But because there's 12 signs on the zodiac wheel and there's 12 tissue salts, that means that 3 of those tissue salts need to be obtained outside of the mother. So that child is deficient in 3 salts. So that child, for the rest of their life, will need to make sure that those 3 salts are included in their diet in a higher quantity than the rest of the salts.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it's also something that I'm very keen on, is I think we keep on giving too much of our information away to big tech. Big tech keeps on giving away our data to companies of not good nature. And I think it's really interesting that we can outsource this ourselves with natal charts, where we're not giving it fully up, but we can actually, instead of getting these tests of seeing what we're what foods we're allergic to, why don't we concentrate on the foods that are good for us and what we need more of? So the tissue salts, we could have a natal chart done, have a look at what we're deficient in, and just like you say, spinach,
and then learn your diet.
So we don't have to be looking at what we're not.
You look at what you are.
Let's look,
so it's
focusing on the good rather than the bad.
So if you know that you are somebody that's naturally deficient in A, B and C, you can eat the foods that you've been eating, but you need to eat a lot more of A, B and C in order for you to be somewhat balanced, and tissue salts are a good way to get them in the system because they are natural. You can give them to children, you can give them to pets. They're not going to harm you. You can have them if you're pregnant. They're a natural salt.
It's the most natural thing.
And all they do is they're very tasteless. They're very tiny little tablets. You put them under the tongue, and the reason why you do that is because they get into the bloodstream a lot quicker.
Same as if you're doing calic.
They're a bit like rennies. Tiny little salty. They're not even salty. They're just a bit chalky, and they just dissolve under the tongue. And I think you take them like 3 to 4 times a day if you are struggling with a condition, if you're having symptoms. But then there is one that's a combination salt which keeps all your salt levels topped up. And so you can take them, and they're easy to get. You get them on Amazon and that kind of thing. If you will always find that you tend to get similar types of ailments in your life. You will always be someone that struggles with a respiratory problem. You'll always be someone that struggles with a skin condition such as eczema. It's a deficiency. There is only illness if there's a deficiency. What happens with these tissue salts, it means that your organs can function properly. If your organs are all functioning properly, that means that your cells can renew. And if your cells can renew, that means that you can clear every illness, including cancer. You can rid the body of cancer. Because what's happening is, as you are renewing the cells, these cells are only renewing with cells that are completely effective, they're working to the optimal level. The old cells will die off eventually, and slowly over time, if you continue to do this, because it's a natural method, it's not going to happen overnight like an antibiotic. They're very hard on the system. Eventually, as the old cells die off, which we know that they do, you will rid yourself of the illness.
Yeah.
That's
rejuvenation.
It. Yeah, but it's on a cellular level. It's on everything. The whole body's made up of cells. Tissue salts feed the cell. The cell creates the man.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. So, is there anything else that you'd like to add as well? I know you have in the mist. You have. You've got a workshop on the way as well.
Oh yeah,
as well
absolutely.
As doing the natal charts and
yeah,
the tarot
so
readings.
I do my readings obviously on my website hrastrologyservices.com, and at the moment I've actually created the course. It's going to be an online course. I'm actually thinking of doing it as live classes.
Yes.
So
I love the idea.
It will be in lessons. There's 7 modules, and it starts off very simple as what is a birth chart. So we overlook a birth chart and we just point out the different parts of the chart and that kind of stuff. But then it will go a little bit deeper into the planets, the signs, the attributes, the characteristics. We'll talk about aspects. We'll talk about what the aspects are and what they mean. And then eventually by the end of the course you will be able to somewhat interpret your own chart. You know, we'll be using live examples. I'll be able to use examples of well-known people and you know, even things that happen in the world today. It's an overview of astrology and to introduce people to the concept of a birth chart and a natal chart, and further to that, you know, depending on the feedback that we get back, that kind of thing, that's going to be available to purchase after the live classes as just one big course, basically. Direct from the website, and if you want to purchase it once the classes have run, it will just be emailed straight to your inbox. So there's no waiting about, there's no faffing, and you've got it to play back as much as you want, and you can research it and stop it and start it as much as you want, so that you can really learn at your own pace. There will be alongside that a online community, so that people can go on there and they can ask questions and they can connect with people that might even have similar placements and ask questions. And we'll just see where it goes from there, really. I think that if we get some good feedback from the class, then we'll think of doing them in person and potentially even travelling with it.
I think it'll go from strength to strength.
Yeah.
It's something that you've been working on for a while, and you keep on. I know that you like to refine it, and you won't release something if it's not where it wants to be at.
Well, the course is complete. You know, the information's there. It's drawn up as a document. I'm just making it look pretty now, basically. So I will be launching that soon, and you know, people can follow me on Instagram and that kind of stuff to be made aware of that. And when I launch it, I'll be obviously taking applications for people to join the classes. It'll be a one-time payment, and then it'll just be one class a week, maybe like a 2-hour class where we touch on a certain subject. And then, you know, you can ask questions and things like that. And there's just like some fun stuff to do, like quizzes at the end of each module, so that you know
making it still fun.
Absolutely. And you know that you're grasping what it is, and I'm not just talking and it's going in one ear and out the other. So it is going to be live. People will be able to comment whilst I'm teaching. So if there's people that want to ask questions and say, you know, can you go back and just go over that again, I'll be able to do that.
I'm definitely keen to I'll be one of your students anyway.
Absolutely. So small groups, you know, it's going to be a small group, and that way that I can actually interact with the group as well. And, you know, you'll meet other people that are interested in the same thing.
It's like-minded people, and again, it's building that community base of where we're all learning from each other.
Absolutely, and it's surprising the people that actually join these courses because of the background that they have. So, you know, I can talk about tissue salts and this, that and the other, but in actual fact there's somebody there that really has gone to town on anatomy, and they're adding a hell of a lot more to the course than what it is that I'm covering because of what it is that they understand. So it isn't just me teaching astrology.
That's what I love about it, 'cause it is the student,
very
the teacher,
diverse.
and then back again.
So I'm excited about that. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.